Welcome to Saturday of week 14, the end of the book of Genesis. It's very much about bones, the bones of Jacob and the bones of Joseph. In other words, basically their burial. I was talking to somebody recently who's used to have in the back garden quite a lot of vegetable beds and decided didn't like them anymore because it looked like a row of graves. Sometimes people don't like the look of graves. I don't like to be looking at graves on a regular basis. At a church with a graveyard, I did once suggest extending the graveyard, taking up some of the back garden of the house, which is quite a considerable size. And the person in the house was horrified. The idea of graves coming closer to the house, even though they'd still be quite a long way away. People have this sort of sense that graves are for when we die. Other people have a real sense that graves are places to visit. I've known people who visited the graves of husbands and wives every day, who make the grave something of a shrine. Personally, I have no interest in a grave. I would plan to be cremated myself, and I really don't matter what happens to the ashes because they're really nothing. I can understand why for some people mortal remains are very special. Certainly in some traditions, they're very special indeed. For me personally, when my life comes to an end, that's the end of my life. What I leave behind are memories, not tangible things, but things that people hopefully may be inspired by. Hopefully I'll be remembered, and I know I will be. I'll be remembered for a long time by quite a number of people, but eventually I'll be forgotten. But that doesn't matter, because I'll not be forgotten in heaven. That's the big thing. So in the first reading, Jacob calls his sons together and explains to them that he wants to be buried back in the land of Canaan in a burial plot that was established by his grandfather Abraham. It's very important for him that his remains should be buried there. That's their land. That is to be the land, or will continue eventually to be the land of the people of Israel. Remember that Jacob's name was changed to Israel, so it's very much part and parcel of his existence. He will always be remembered. The end of the book of Genesis, Joseph talks to his brothers and says that when he dies, he wants his body to be buried. But then when they go back to the land of Canaan, which they will 400 years later, he wants his bones to be taken back there. And the book of Exodus tells us that's exactly what the people did. They took Joseph's bones back there because it was Joseph who saved them from famine. It was Joseph who endured a time of slavery, a time of great suffering. And the end result of that was that he was able to relieve the famine of his family and his neighbors. It's what we do in this world that's really important. And where graves and mementos, statues, and so on, what's important about them is that they remind us of the achievements of people who've gone before us. Jacob achieved a great deal. He suffered a great deal. He was a great perseverer. When he worked for 7 years for his future father-in-law Laban, he then worked another 7 years, even though he was cheated. But then he was the one who cheated in the birthright with Esau. Perhaps what goes around comes around. But Jacob was very persevering, very strong in faith. And it was from Jacob that the 12 tribes of Israel come, his 12 sons, named the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph was incredibly faithful, incredibly forgiving. In the final part of the book of Genesis, his brothers concoct a plan. They go to Joseph and say, "Oh, our father said that when he dies, you've got to look after us." Joseph had forgiven them. He'd embraced them. I think the bottom line is they found it too difficult to forgive themselves. That's perhaps one of the biggest problems in our society. People find it difficult to forgive themselves. There have been some incredible acts of generosity of people who've been forgiving towards people who've caused them so much hurt, so much suffering. But to forgive ourselves is a lot more difficult. I think that's the origin of the Catholic Church's obsession with guilt. Guilt is refusal to forgive yourself. God forgives completely. What's important is that we learn to forgive ourselves and also to forgive others. It's only then that we can look to a future, and rather than dwelling on what was, dwelling perhaps too much on graves, too much on past things, we embrace the present and look to the future with confidence. Jacob certainly did. Joseph did. And eventually everything was realized. So thank you very much for listening.